chapter 96. This is the second chapter in the group of Tehillim that we started studying last week that makes up Kabbalah Shabbos, the tefillot that were arranged for us to say Friday night. I think we started talking a little bit last week about how that came to be. How did we end up with these prakim of Tehillim? So we won't spend any time talking about that today. But I do just want to point out that this particular parak of Tehillim really requires a lot of background, not the kind of background that is always typical, but the kind of background that really is going to broaden, I think, our horizons a little bit about the place of Tehillim in Tanakh, meaning we know there are 24 books of Tanakh, 5 in the Chumash that everyone is familiar with, and then 19 other books broken up between Nevi'im and Ksuvim. And the place of Tehillim, I mean, it's listed in almost every Tanakh. If you have one book that has all 24 in it, Tanakh is, to the best of my knowledge, always the first in the book of Ketuvim. But it holds a unique place in the sense that David HaMelech, who is known as the composer, the editor, etc., which of course we know he shared with some other people in Tanakh, Tehillim is the book that gives us a little bit of insight, a little bit of deeper understanding as to what was going on for him in his life during the books in the Navi that talk about the episodes, the stories from his life. So for example, very famously, when David has this difficult sin with Bathsheba, which really causes a tremendous amount of pain and suffering for himself and his family. So the Navi never tells us how he feels. The Navi only tells us what he does. What are the actions that he takes? What are the conversations that he has, both with the Navi Natan, and what are the punishments that he receives? It's more a historical recording. But when you look at Tehillim and you look at, for example, most famously, Parak Nun Aleph, chapter 51. So that is the Parak of Tehillim that Chazal tell us David HaMelech wrote and composed while he was going through this difficult, very difficult, painful period in his life, looking to do tshuva, trying to repair his relationship. So Tehillim very often has this supplementary relationship, really supplementary, to the Navi. And we see that quite often. And we see that not just with David, we have seen that even with Parak Chafbet, chapter 22, which is said by Chazal to be the parak that was written by Queen Esther as she was coming to face Achashverosh for that first time after she hadn't been called for 30 days, when she goes and eventually invites him and Haman to that party. That parak of Tehillim was said to be composed that's what she said while she was walking quite fearfully up to Achashverosh. So Tehillim is known to play that role. Something so fascinating that I learned, and I've never studied these prakim in depth before, so something so fascinating that I learned that I'm excited to share with you about Parak Tzadi Vav is you're basically getting an entire Nach lesson when you study this one parak. It is connected both to Navi as well as to Divrei Hayamim, so the book of Chronicles. So just one word on what Divrei Hayamim is. So Divrei Hayamim, which are the last books of the Torah, of the last books of Tanakh, I should say, also play a complementary/supplementary role to the books of Navi. So, for example, the Navi might talk about a war that a Jewish king fought, and it will give you, some basic information. But if you look at the parallel prakim in Divrei Hayamim in the book of Chronicles, and there's 2, Divrei Hayamim Aleph and Bet, if you were to look in Divrei Hayamim, you might get a different picture. You might get something a little bit more detailed about what went on in the camp or what went on with the enemy. It just offers a slightly more nuanced, sometimes not nuanced necessarily, sometimes just more information really about what took place in the Navi. So in general, it's a good idea when we're studying Navi to constantly be referring to the parallel chapters in Divrei Hayamim, but it's not something that all of us are so careful to do. And certainly we're not accustomed to do it with Tehillim. We're accustomed to doing it with Navi. But what we're going to see about chapter 96 is that it really invites you to take a look at both places. And this particular parak, which we're studying in the context of Kabbalah Shabbos, is actually quite meaningful because appears, big chunks of it appear in our daily tefillah in Psukei de Zimra, in Shachris. So every once in a while, I feel like this is like a sleeper hit. It's like it's a parak of Tehillim. It's beautiful. The words are beautiful. We're used to relating to it through Kabbalah Shabbos, but it turns out that I think a proper study of this parak really should and hopefully will enhance our experience saying it, which is not just on Friday night. It's actually on a daily basis. So let's start now with, here we go. I'm going to share my screen with you so we could be looking together. Let's see, here it is. Okay. So as you see here, Parak 96. As we mentioned last time, just briefly, I'll remind us that these Prakim of Tehillim were very likely written by Moshe. They were then maybe brought to us in Sefer Tehillim through David, but the original composer was very likely Moshe. That's what Chazal understands. But there's a lot of different ways to understand sort of that interplay between David and Moshe. We won't talk about it now. Instead, we are just going to focus on this particular parak. So, Shiru Lashem Shir Chadash, Shiru Lashem Kol Haaretz. Okay, so right away, we see the word shir 3 times. And if we move ahead even just to the first word of the next pasuk bet, shiru lashem. Okay, so we have four times the language of shir, the language of song. And I don't know about you, but the first thing I noticed was that it's the language of shir and not the language of shira. Okay, so we know that there are many songs in Tanakh. We're familiar with Az Yashir, the Shirat Hayam, the song the Jewish people sang after they crossed through the Yam Suf. We're maybe familiar with Shirat Devorah, the song that Devorah sang after her victory, she and Barak, who had been victorious. So we're accustomed to the idea of the Jewish people singing Shira, singing some kind of song, following a miracle or following some kind of significant event. But especially as Pesach is beginning to come a little bit more into focus, and the idea of Shira Chadasha as well as Shir Chadash are both mentioned in the Haggadah. And so it sort of begs the following question, which is, why is it sometimes Shira and why is it sometimes Shir? Right? So in particular, when we're getting to Magid, the paragraph that introduces us to that first 2 chapters of Halal, right? The last line is V'nomar lefanav Shira Chadasha Hallelujah, right? So that phrase of Shira Chadasha, and here we're seeing the phrase Shiru Lashem Shir Chadash. Now it happens to be, this is a little bit of a, sometimes you kind of like fabricate a question. The question is really brought actually more strongly within the Haggadah itself, because in the Haggadah itself, and I should have pulled that up for you, I apologize. We have that paragraph I just quoted of Shira Chadasha, V'nomar lefanav Shira Chadasha, but we also have the phrase in one of the brachos in the Haggadah, the phrase Shir Chadash. So both are actually referenced. And I learned something quite fascinating. I saw it, I think, in the name of the Malbim, but I also heard it explained so articulately by Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz in a shir that he gave on Tehillim, on Torah Anytime. So he helped me make sure that I really understood the Malbim. So the Malbim, Rabbi Breitowitz explains, draws a very significant distinction, and it's really one that requires us putting aside maybe our slightly politically correct minds for a deeper understanding of the difference between Zachar and Nekeva, masculine and feminine. And I don't know that this is so politically incorrect, but you'll hopefully accept it with the introduction that I gave you. So the Malbim explains, it is very clear when we use the masculine version, Shir Chadash, you see there how it's missing the 2 hays, versus Shira Chadasha, the feminine version, Nekeva, where whenever you have a kamatz and a hey at the end of a word, it's almost always, that's like classic Nekeva, classic feminine conjugation. And so the Malbim explains the difference is anytime you see Shira Chadasha, you see the feminine version of that phrase, you're looking at a song that was sung very much in this world. It's for something that has already taken place, and it's very olam hazeh. It's the kind of song that we would sing in thanks to Hashem for a miracle or for an event that has taken place that was miraculous, very much in this world. Whereas, and that's why it's used, for example, always to refer to Shirat Hayam, Yetziat Mitzrayim. That was quite miraculous, but it was definitely something that took place in the here and now, meaning in our timeline, in our current timeline. Whereas when you see the language of Shir Chadash, says the Malbim, by definition, you are referring to a song that will be sung for something that hasn't happened yet. Shir Chadash, the masculine version, is reserved for something that will happen in what we call either Yemos HaMashiach, the days of when the Messiah will come, the futuristic terms. And it is something that by definition has not happened yet. Says the Malbim, explained by Rabbi Breitowitz, there is the root of this difference is based in the difference between the feminine and masculine, I guess, typical experience. And what he explains is that for a woman, and we talk about the idea of Mashiach in very feminine terms, right? We talk about chavlei Mashiach, the birth pangs or the birth pains of Mashiach. And he explains that for a woman who is in the process of giving birth, there is a tremendous amount of pain leading up to it. And then the baby comes and, the equivalent of Mashiach comes, right? Except that in the here and the now, the way that a woman experiences birth is not that the second she has the baby, she then pops up out of bed, is completely energized, has no pain, no physical suffering, no emotional suffering. She just, pops up out of bed and begins to take care of this new miraculous life that she has just given birth to. That's not at all how it works, explained Rabbi Breitowitz, that the miracles that we experience in this world in the here and now are feminine in the sense that there is still difficulty associated with the miracle itself. So that a woman who gives birth, she experiences pain in the delivery, in the labor and the delivery, but there is still pain after she has the child. There is physical pain, there is emotional pain, right? We know the Torah tells us after the sin of Chava and of Adam that there is pain also in the raising of the children. That is not an easy process. It's not like there is, this carefree, now I've paid my dues and now there's no more pain involved. That's not how it works. And Rabbi Breitowitz was explaining the Malbim to say there is something very feminine about that women, the way that we experience salvation, the way that we experience miracle, it's not a full or complete salvation. There is still pain associated with it. Now, we can all argue that is the reality, I think, for almost every woman that I am certainly familiar with who has given birth. And the Malbim is explaining that's the reality of the wonderful, miraculous things that all of them that take place in this world, that they are wonderful. They are astonishing. They are worthy of singing songs about, but there's something a little bit missing in the sense that it doesn't mean that there's no more pain. Something wonderful happens, but there's still kind of a heaviness associated with it. Whereas the Shir Chadash, and Rabbi Breitowitz made quite a few funny comments about the husband after the wife has given birth, right? So in the typical scenario, the husband, he might be exhausted from watching his wife be, so uncomfortable. And, it's an emotional thing and a difficult thing to watch. But for all intents and purposes, the father is then free to enjoy the Simcha, that there is a new child, hopefully a healthy child. The wife is well on her way to recovery. She did an amazing job. He's so proud of her. He does get up and is ready to just raise that child. And for the most part, the father's experience, obviously this is not, 100% true for 100% of people. But in the typical, stereotypical scenario, the father isn't as weighed down. It's not as heavy for him, whatever pain is involved in raising the children. And obviously we know, again, this is not really fully true, but if we were to stereotype, that's what we would say. The woman is walking around with a bit more of the heaviness than the husband. And therefore, when we see the language of Shir Chadash, as we do here, the Malbim says, this is your key to know this is a song that has yet to be sung, because the masculine version of praise, of song, is by definition, it's all good. it's Yemos HaMashiach. It hasn't happened yet. It's not Chevle Mashiach. It's not the birth pangs of Mashiach. That's a Shira Chadasha. Yitzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, those things, as wondrous and as much as they are the foundations of our faith, were not full or complete as far as being pain-free. There was still an element. We were still in Galus. We were still in exile. We spent the next 40 years in the desert trying to find ourselves and work on our relationship with Hashem. So it was not the end all be all. Whereas Shir Chadash always refers to the final redemption when Mashiach will come, and the kind of pain associated with our relationship with Hashem's being revealed in this world, that will no longer exist. It's not to say there won't be other very mundane types of things that people have to still be involved in, certainly according to Maimonides, according to the Rambam. But when it comes to pain in this world that is associated with the fact that the whole world doesn't recognize that there's one God, those types of pains, things that come out of the kind of pain that is associated with war, right? With world powers struggling for control, those kinds of things that we will not have. And then we will sing a Shir Chadash. So by definition, this masculine version of Shir is reserved for something that has not happened yet. So what's fascinating about, it's a beautiful point, and it's a beautiful way to distinguish between the two types of Shir versus Shira, Shir Chadash versus Shira Chadasha. But it creates an interesting dynamic, which is to say that this particular parak, along with the other prakim of Kabbalah Shabbos, are very clearly pointing us towards Yemot HaMashiach. And this fits very well, really, with what the Mikubalim, the Kabbalists in Tzfat, the way they viewed Shabbos. They very much viewed, and hopefully we can take a page from their book, if not completely. Then my son, actually, Effie, who's studying in yeshiva this year, was in Tzfat for Shabbos. And while I've only gotten very choppy voice notes about the experience, I can tell you I've never heard him use so many incredible, amazing, unbelievable, gorgeous, beyond. I've never heard him use that many words about one place in one Shabbos. There is something quite magical, mystical about the city of Tzfat. And those people who live there, who are the ones who are really responsible for formulating Kabbalah Shabbos as we know it today, understood Shabbos to be very much Me'ein Olam Haba, right? They lived it. They lived and breathed the fact that Shabbos was a taste of the next world. It was the closest thing we can get in this world to the times of Mashiach. And so it's so fitting, of course, that they chose the prakim of Tehillim that are constantly encouraging us to look forward to the times of Mashiach, but then remembering that we're ushering in the one day a week that is the closest thing we can get to experiencing Mashiach. That, this 25-hour sliver of our week really does have the potential to connect us, to have that kind of clarity that we expect the world will have when Mashiach comes. That's really the thing that we could be focusing on as we're ushering in Shabbos on Friday night. So that's one aspect. But there's a second aspect that I mentioned when we started, which is that this parak of Tehillim is also very much related to something that did happen. So, it's Torah, so we can have a lot of different approaches, and they don't have to contradict. They can kind of work together, and we can learn from both. So what I'd like to do, we will get to the rest of the parak, but what I'd like to do is draw your attention to a story that takes place in the Navi, that is also said to be connected to this parak of Tehillim. And as we mentioned at the beginning, Tehillim is very often viewed as the thoughts and feelings of David that he experienced while he was going through whatever events and facts are listed in Sefer Shmuel. So let's jump over to Sefer Shmuel for a moment. It was actually Parak Vav, so I'm going to scoot up here a little bit. I think I got excited as I was back in Sefer Shmuel and I just kept reading. So the story in Parak Vav, the 6th chapter in the 2nd book of Shmuel, the books of Shmuel generally, they talk about obviously Shmuel, who was the prophet, but primarily focus on the kingship of Shaul HaMelech, Shaul the king, and David the king. And the bulk of it is really about David because he was a very significant figure in our history. So says the Navi that the Aron, the famous ark that housed the Luchot Habrit, both the whole complete set of tablets as well as the shattered ones that were in the Aron that had the Kruvim on top. So the Aron, which accompanied the Jewish people into the land of Israel, never had a permanent home. Obviously we know the Beit HaMikdash was not built until David's son built it, Shlomo, but it didn't even have a permanent temporary home, if that makes any sense. Meaning it didn't have, the Mishkan itself didn't have the Aron for extended periods of time. It was captured in a war. If you remember the story of Eli, the Kohen Gadol, when he dies of shock and surprise, he falls and dies from the horror of hearing that the Aron Brit Hashem, the Holy Ark and the Covenant of God, has been captured by the Plishtim. That was enough to literally kill the man. And from that point on, it never is really fully settled amongst the Jewish people. So David HaMelech makes a grand effort to return the Aron, at the very least, that it should have a semi-permanent home in a tent in Yerushalayim. He knows at this point, he has been told that he is not going to build the Beit HaMikdash. He is reminded of it many more times, but he at the very least feels like it should at least be in Yerushalayim. Like, I get to live in Yerushalayim. How could it be the Aron is not living in Yerushalayim? And it takes a couple of tries. I'm going to leave that part out. He assembles a huge crew to escort the Aron home, and tragedy strikes where somebody gets a little over anxious. It's actually quite a parallel to the story we read in Shul on Shabbos, the story of Nadav and Avihu, who from clearly some kind of lack of boundaries or overexcitement end up sinning so significantly that they are killed on a very, very glorious, wonderful day when the Mishkan was supposed to be dedicated. So a very similar story takes place where David has assembled thousands, tens of thousands of people to escort the Aron home. And one individual gets overexcited or concerned perhaps that the Aron is going to fall. His name is Uzzah, and he reaches out and he actually touches the Aron, which is totally forbidden. And he's struck down. He dies in that moment. And based on that, David puts all of the plans on hold. I actually saw a beautiful parallel to this on social media this morning. We are all, unfortunately, very aware of the uptick in terrorist activity in Israel. Very painful, very devastating, some really horrific losses of life, which we never obviously want to see. But I saw on I think it was Facebook page of a well-known modern day Israeli artist. I can picture him right now, but for some reason I'm blanking on his name. It'll come to me. And he was supposed to release a new song, a new music video yesterday. And he posted on his page, given the events that took place in Hadera, I obviously cannot release my new song today. I'm going to wait a little bit until we've finished mourning our dead. And then, of course, we will rise up again, because that's what the Jewish people do. But I was so, moved and reminded again about how you could fall into the trap of thinking that, unfortunately, terrorism is something that Israelis, Jews the world over, I don't want to say, God forbid, we ever get used to it, but we could become a little bit hardened to it. Like, it's something, unfortunately, that happens. It just happened last week. And so are we really going to stop our lives every time? And I just thought there was something so powerful about this singer, whose name still hasn't come to me. He has like thick, black, small glasses, that he lives in Pardes Chana. I can't remember his name. And that he said, no, like, as a Jewish people, we have to pause. Like, we can't just go on with business as usual. And that's very similar to what David HaMelech declares. He says, Uzzah was just killed. I'm putting all the instruments away. I planned this huge party. I brought out all of the top catering, and he was giving out tons, and I mean literally thousands of pounds of food to the Jewish people. It was a massive festival. It was a huge party bringing the Aron, and he calls the entire thing off based on what had happened. And another few months go by, and eventually they get to a point where David HaMelech is ready to bring the Aron from the house that it had been residing in, the house of Oved Edom Hagiti, as you see here in Pasuk Yud Aleph. It had been there for 3 months. And he says, okay, I see that Oved, the person whose home the Aron had been resting in, was the recipient of a tremendous amount of bracha. It must be that it's time, right? That things have calmed down and we're ready to sort of turn the page and move to this next stage. It's time to bring the Aron back to Yerushalayim. And of course, this is a very famous story. It's unfortunately a famous story because of the interaction that David has with his wife Michal. But let's focus on the Simcha of the day, where David goes, Vayal et Aron HaElokim. He takes the Ark of Hashem, Mi Beit Oved Edom from this house, the house of Oved, and he brings it bisimcha, with great rejoicing. And it talks about how the entire way, every few steps, every 6 steps, they were bringing more and more karbanot. And David, for his part, in Pasuk Yud Daled, mecharker b'chol oz lifnei Hashem. He is whirling, mecharker. You see how that, it's like hirhurim, the thoughts in your mind that keep repeating themselves. That it's that, what's it called? The cyclical way of thinking, circular maybe, where it just keeps repeating upon itself. So anytime you have a word in Hebrew where the shoresh repeats itself within the word, it's this idea that it's something that's happening over and over and over again. It's, rolling, kind of cyclical, circular kind of thing. So David mecharker, it's the same word, charker, means that he's twirling and twirling and twirling, or dancing and dancing and dancing. He is going all out with tremendous amount. He's investing all of his oz, all of his strength. But David chagor ephod bad, and he was wearing a linen, not like a coat, kind of like a wrap, I guess you would say. I'm sure it was very fashionable at the time. And this is what in the end causes his wife to get upset with him, because maybe he had lost track of himself just a bit and wasn't so careful. He forgot to safety pin. So there was a lot of exposure, more exposure than what she deemed appropriate for the king of the Jewish people. And there's shofar blowing, and it's very exciting. And the end of the parak lets us know about this very unfortunate, very difficult interaction that David has with his wife, where she's looking from the window and she sees that he's acting from her perspective, so inappropriately, from his perspective, with tremendous amount of passion and excitement. And, as is often the case when one person says something hurtful to the other person, she starts off the conversation in a very critical, biting way. And, oh, look, the, leaping, twirling king of Israel has decided to show up here. And David responds equally hurtfully, basically saying that, this is the interaction here in these psukim, where he basically says, like, obviously Hashem prefers me over your family, like whatever your perception is of what is appropriate is off, it's wrong, because Hashem rejected your family, meaning her father, Shaul the king, in favor of me to become the king. So this is a very painful, unfortunate example, how when one person says something critical and hurtful, biting, that what they're really doing is inviting the other person to do the same. And that moment of choice that the person has who's been hurt, before they respond, in this case, David HaMelech, Michal hurts him terribly. And he had a choice to make, right? He could have responded. He could have let it go. He could have tried to explain himself. He had a lot of different options, but the option that he chooses is to shoot right back at her. And we know, obviously, that doesn't accomplish anything. That only creates a lot of pain and a lot of negativity. Okay. So why am I telling you all of this when really we want to get back to Tehillim Tzadi Vav? Because our parak of Tehillim is said to have been composed during this time. That the time where David HaMelech and the Jewish people, after all of these stops and starts of trying to reunite the city of Yerushalayim with the Aron of Hashem, and, it almost happened and then it got canceled and then it happened again. And it was very overwhelming in a wonderful way, in a beautiful way. This marked a tremendous milestone in the establishment of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, that this was the song that was sung at that time. And if we would have gone further in the Psukim, we would have seen how, actually earlier in the Psukim, we would have seen that David appointed, thousands of people to be there to line the streets, as well as many Leviim and Kohanim to play instruments and sing songs. Say Chazal, say the sages, it was this parak that they were singing. This was such a momentous occasion that it merited the type of song that we're going to sing when Mashiach comes. Okay, so that just sort of gives you the two perspectives with which we can view this parak of Tehillim. It is either something that is so elevated, it is only going to be sung at a time where we have tremendous clarity because Mashiach has arrived, or maybe that's true, but maybe it was also sung at a time where the Jewish people were finally witness to the Aron, the symbol of Hashem in this world being returned to its rightful, temporary, albeit temporary home in Yerushalayim, which was really a tremendous acknowledgement that David was really the king of the Jewish people, and he was supposed to be the king of the Jewish people, that the Jewish people were really supposed to reside in the land of Israel with Yerushalayim as their eternal capital. Like, this was huge. This was quite exciting at the time. I don't know what the modern day equivalent would be, but it seems like this is Hashem giving his seal of approval to David and his government and the Jewish people's existence in the land of Israel. It was massive. And that is the background from the other side of what might be going on in this parak of Tehillim. So Shir Hashem, Shir Chadash, we're singing new, beautiful song. Something wonderful has happened. And not only should they be singing, but they should be blessing. I see my internet connection is unstable. I'm hoping that won't affect us too much. You'll let me know, please, if you can't hear me. Somebody will let me know, I hope.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, amazing. Thank you. Okay, perfect. I guess if you can't hear me, I probably won't be able to hear you either, but hopefully the issue will resolve itself. So Shirul Hashem, sing to Hashem, and Baruch Hu Shemo, bless his name. So what is the difference between, we're seeing here, Shirul Hashem, Baruch Hu Shemo, and then we're going to see later on the concept of Hallel. So actually, when we get up to the concept of Hallel, I'll mention an idea there. Basru miyom liyom yeshuato. Okay, let's try to explain that phrase. Basru miyom liyom. Exclaim, proclaim something, Yeshuato, right? His salvation, miyom liyom, from one day to the next. So this gives us the impression that daily, this is something we are supposed to be doing. And this word basru, we're maybe familiar with the phrase bisorot tovot, right? Good news, or unfortunately bisorot raot. You generally hear it more bisorot tovot. The idea of sharing good news. And say the Mefarshim very much that that's what this word always refers to, that it always refers to a shmu'ah chadasha. That's what the Mitzudat Zion says. That there will be, there's good news to share, and that's what this word is used for, and it's specifically used for something new. So what's fascinating, and I think if I remember correctly, I heard this from Rabbi Breidowitz as well, is that doesn't fit so well. That idea of sharing a shmuah chadasha, a new piece of news, something that is, breakthrough worthy, like you're watching whatever you're watching, and then, dun, 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 there's like a special announcement of something. So that's what basru is used for. It's something that is, wow, we weren't expecting to hear this. But that's a funny term to use and associate it with a daily proclamation, right? Generally, things that we hear every single day are not newsworthy anymore. They kind of become regular. So that's specifically the point. The point is that we know that there are the big deal type of things. There are the big news type of things, right? The wonderful simchas, right? The wonderful announcements we hope to hear, good news about people's health, about, life cycle types of things, wonderful, exciting things that feel like they are newsworthy and we want to shout them from the rooftops. Says David HaMelech, we're supposed to have that level of excitement every single day. Because even though we might not be privy to good news of that level every day, things that are worthy of being, for example, just because the sun rises every day doesn't mean we shouldn't be so excited every time that it happens, right? Just because we all, Baruch Hashem, opened our eyes this morning, right? And we sort of have come to expect that that's what's going to happen, doesn't mean that when it happens, we shouldn't be struck with this basru miyom liyom yeshuato. Even though it's something that's happening every day, we should be so excited that we want to shout it from the rooftops, even though it happens every day. Right? That specifically, we're supposed to ideally try to renew within ourselves this excitement about the Yeshuos, the salvations of Hashem, that we don't necessarily associate with being, nisim v'niflaot. They still are. We just, we're not necessarily at a level where we ascribe to them that description. But that doesn't mean that that's not actually what it's worthy of. So Shiru Lashem, we're going to sing to Hashem. We're calling out for people to sing to Hashem and to bless his name. We've spoken about this before, that in general, that we see that those two words going together, because to give Hashem a bracha sounds a little bit funny, but Baruch Hu Shemo, to bless his name, which means the way that he's revealed in this world, that's how we relate to him. That's maybe a little bit more comfortable for us to say. Again, sapru vagoyim kavodo, tell all of the nations about his greatness. You see here, there's a lot of command words. Shiru Lashem, right? Shiru Lashem 3 times, actually, right? Sing out to Hashem. It's a command. Do it. Baruch Hu Shemo, bless his name. Basru miyom liyom yeshua. Spread the word. Start spreading the news. And then sapru vagoyim kavodo. Make sure that you don't keep this private. This is not just something that is meant to be shared amongst your friends and your family or your Jewish community. This is something you have a responsibility, says David HaMelech, to share the news, to spread the news amongst all of the nations of the world, right? This is clearly what we refer to when we talk about ourselves as an Or LaGoyim, that our job to be a light, right, doesn't mean anything other than being a living, breathing narrative of the story that Hashem created the world and continues to run it. So sapru vagoyim kavodo, tell the story to all of the nations of the world. B'chol ha'amim niflaotav, amongst all of the nations, his niflaot, his wondrous deeds, his miracles, his like really incredible acts. So I think it's the Malbim. Yes, the Malbim draws a distinction between Amim and Goyim. And I'll share with you 2 ideas about this. Number 1, he says Goyim refer to nations of the world who don't really get that there is a God. They don't really understand that there is a one creator at all. They're like, as we say, they're not holding. They just don't get the big picture. They're living their lives. They're busy. Maybe they worship other things, but they are lacking this idea that there's a creator. Yeah, there's a lot of people in the world that are like that. However, there are also a lot of people, but these people are slightly more elevated, and they are referred to as Amim. The Amim, the nations of the world, when we see that language used, that refers to people who actually do know that there's a creator, and they know that he's always been here. But where they're lacking is they don't understand that he continues to be involved in the world. They don't understand that he continues to be all powerful. It's like he had this burst of creativity, was somehow able to create the world. He's clearly an impressive character, but they don't ascribe to him the power that we do. They don't recognize that just like he created the laws of nature, he could totally turn them upside down if he chose to, right? That he is Mal'ah ha'aretz kinyanecha, that everything is his acquisition. He owns it all. So he could decide to, build it up or shut it down whenever he chooses. So the Amim are more elevated than the Goyim in the sense that they recognize there's a God, and that he's a creator, but they don't recognize his continuous involvement in the world. So that is that's one way to understand this pasuk. And you could sort of understand how these words fit in, right? That the Goyim, who are not yet at a level of recognition of God. So for them, you have to tell about his glory, his honor. And for the nations that already get it a little bit, but not fully. So with them, we want to remind them of his ability to do niflaot. Niflaot really refers to being able to upend the laws of nature, right? To turn everything upside down, because they know there's a God. So we don't have to tell them that there is a God. We just have to tell them that he's all powerful. So that's the distinction. That's the way the Malbim reads it. Another way to read this is that some of the Mefarshim understand the Amim always refer to the Shvatim in the Jewish people, that every Shevet, every tribe is its own Am. And the Amim are actually referred to all the groups of Jewish people. If we want to say all the different factions within the Jewish people. So yes, we're going to tell the world out there that he's wonderful. And in here, in our own Jewish community, and in the world of the Jewish people, we have an obligation also to talk about his wondrous deeds, right? To share the miracles that Hashem does for us, to enlighten our fellow Jews to the fact that we are so blessed to have not just been created and put on this earth, but to have this wondrous mission and to be looked after by this all-powerful God. That is something that we don't have to always just share with out there. We also need to share within here. So those are just two different ways to understand that pasuk. Ki gadol Hashem umehulal ma'od. God is so great. We know, of course, Gedula always refers to God's kindness, and he is mihulal. He is much acclaimed. He is praiseworthy. No rahu al kol Elohim. He is awesome. He is awe-filled, right? Higher, more than all of the other Elohim. Elohim here could be referring to other powerful things in nature, could be referring to the angels and other, celestial beings that Hashem has created, or it could even refer to Elohim, could refer to like judges or people of authority. So we're just pointing out that Hashem is great. He is praiseworthy, and he is so much more awesome, so much more powerful than all of those other beings or people of power. Just a moment about the word. Actually, I'm not going to do that today. We're running out of time. Okay. Ki kol Elohei ha'amim elilim, right? The gods of all the other people, well, they're just idols. They're elilim. They're el and lo, lal. There's nothing there. Al, it's not existent. Vashem shamayim asa. But in the meantime, Hashem, he created the heavens, right? Big difference in the capability of the idols and God. Hod vehadar lifanav. Glory, beauty, majesty are in front of him or before him. Oz v'tiferet b'mikdasho. There is space for strength and beauty, splendor, b'mikdasho, in his temple. We could spend a lot of time on this pasuk. First of all, from a Kabbalistic perspective, Hod is one of the spheros and all these things that I don't understand. So is Tiferet, and so is Oz. I think, is a very Kabbalistic pasuk. But for our purposes, let's just take it maybe to its, I think, practical implication, which is human beings were each given tremendous amounts of talents. Every person was given talents, abilities, strengths. Each person was made unique and different and beautiful. And this pasuk is a reminder that in the context of celebrating the Aron returning to Hashem is also a confirmation that the Jewish people, each individual and as a nation, have so much to offer. And it's sort of this indication, like, bring it all lefanav, bring it all in front of Hashem. There's not a talent or a strength that a human being has that can't be used in the service of Hashem. Every unique ability that a person has can be used, should be used. This is like a call to us to use those things in the service of Hashem. Havul Hashem mishpachot amim, right? Bring it all up to Hashem. Havul Hashem kavod va'oz. Bring it to him, ascribe it to him. And that the best way to show that we recognize that the talents, abilities, strengths that we have come from Hashem are to use them in the service of Hashem. So I think we're always impressed by the things that we can't do that other people can. So for example, there's a lot of things that I can't do, but one of the things that I know I can't do is sew. I can't sew, I can't knit, I can't needlepoint, any of those things. It's never going to, I also can't deal with keep plants alive or healthy, unfortunately. So I'm so impressed by people who can. And what I'm the most impressed by are people who then are knitting and then donating the hats, and sending them to Ukraine, or people who are, knitting and then donating their sweaters and hats and gloves and all those things to the homeless, right? That is a person who has a unique ability, has a strength, developed a talent, and then decided they're going to use it in the service of Hashem. But what we're supposed to keep in mind, and I heard this actually on a Dvar Torah from one of the Rebbeim from Torah Trago, where my son is studying in yeshiva, he was pointing out, some people are easily impressed by things they don't have. So he was talking about guys who are very skilled in basketball and how people who are not athletic might be very impressed by kids who are very skilled in basketball. But to keep in mind that the person who has the basketball skill has an obligation to use that to serve Hashem and to do good things with it. And the person who doesn't have the skill in basketball is obligated to find what they do have a skill in. Good. Be impressed with the basketball player, but also don't get down on yourself that you don't have that skill, right? I'm not going to be depressed that I can't sew a button. I'm going to try to focus on some of the other things that I can do, even if some of the things I can't do are quite basic. So bring it to Hashem, right? Use the strengths that we have and attribute them to Hashem. And the best way that we could show Hashem that we know he's the source of it all is to use it to come close to him and to serve him. Havul Hashem kavod shemo, right? Bring glory to his name. Se'u mincha uvo lechatzrotav. This is now a description of how the Jewish people are coming closer and closer, right, to the area where the Aron was going to be living, so to speak, right? They're coming closer and closer, entering the court. You could picture also, when we talk about a chatzer, like in Megillah, when we talk about the chatzer Beit HaMelech, the courtyard of the king, or we talk about the chatzer within the Beis HaMikdash, you're talking about getting to a more private space, right? So you're picturing like all of these people, all of these nations, and we're bringing in all of our talents and all of our abilities and all of our karbanos. And as we get closer and closer, we're creating this more intimate setting where it's just like us and Hashem. And then what happens when we get to the chatzer, to that more inner sanctum, the inner courtyard? Hishtachavu Hashem b'hadras kodesh. We're going to bow down to Hashem with the beauty, the magic of his holiness. Chilu mipanav kol haaretz. We have this very intimate relationship with Hashem. And I think this is a point that is really brought out specifically in how this parak relates to Shabbos, right? That from Friday night until Saturday night, that is an intimate 25 hours that we spend alone with Hashem. The nations of the world do not have that time. And so by definition, their relationship with God is different. Someone who is not Jewish, not allowed to keep a full Shabbos. They're not allowed to have a taste. They want to join. They want to become part of the Jewish people and keep Shabbos. Come. We will welcome you with open arms. And we have a lot of commandments that tell us of how we're supposed to treat you. But somebody who is not part of the Jewish people isn't allowed to keep Shabbos because it's a 25-hour time of total intimacy between us and Hashem. And the rest of the world, we have an obligation to tell them how awesome he is, but they're in awe. They're in a state of just constantly being wowed by his power and his control. We are also, sometimes I think we forget, right? We are also in awe of him, but we never want to lose sight of that very close, intimate relationship, that bond that we do have with him, which is described so beautifully here as we come closer and closer. And that's really what happens during the week as well. So it's true in space in the Beis HaMikdash, and it's true in time as we get closer and closer to Shabbos. Imru v'goyim Hashem malach, right? We declare amongst everyone that Hashem is the king. Aftikon tevel bal timot, right? The world, we've seen this pasuk before, the world stands firm. It can't be taken off of its foundation, right? It's Tola Aretz al Blima, like it's just kind of hanging out there in the middle of the universe, but it's never going to be thrown off kilter. Hashem put it there and he keeps it there. Yadin amim b'meisharim, right? And he judges the nations of the world. Again, this could also refer to the Jewish people, but with yashar, it's straight. Yismechu hashamayim v'tagel haaretz yiram hayam umlo'o. Let everything up there rejoice, and let everything down here be proclaiming with a lot of noise. Tagel haaretz, yiram hayam. Let there be ra'am. Ra'am is thunder. It's loud, right? So this is a very loud proclamation. What is the difference between Simcha and Gila? I think we've seen this before. I'm not sure. I think we had spoken about the fact that one kind of takes some time to build, that Simcha is related to the word Simicha, according to Rav Hirsch, and that Simcha is something that builds very slowly within a person. It's not like you wake up one day and you're like, I'm happy, right? I feel it now. I never felt it before. It's something that you might not notice how it's growing, the same way we don't always notice how a plant is changing or growing. That's what Simcha is. That's, I think, what we had seen before. But I saw it from the Vilna Gaon. The Gra explains actually that, I just want to make sure I'm quoting the right person. Yeah. The Vilna Gaon explains that Simcha is reserved for when something is new, kind of like a Shira Chadasha, that Simcha relates to something new, something like a new piece of news or a new event that takes place. Whereas Gila is is the status after the Simcha. That's why Simcha comes first in the pasuk. We'd have to look through some other pasukim to see if that's consistent. I assume if the Gra says it, that it is. Simcha is that burst of excitement that you get. I'm going to a Simcha. That's why we call it a Simcha, because it's like an event. But the Gila is the feeling we hope to have, we hope the couple has after they get married. It's the continuation of joy after the child is born, God willing, after the bar mitzvah. It's that continuation, the maintenance of joy. It's joy maintenance, whereas Simcha is the burst of joy. Ya'aloz sadai v'chol asher bo, right? Everything in the fields and everything in them are also going to be in the aliza. Aliza, right? The name Aliza is singing out, calling out to Hashem also with joy. Az yiranenu kol atzayar. And then even the trees in the forest are going to shout for joy. Lifnei Hashem, this will all happen in front of Hashem. Kiva lishpot haaretz, right? Hashem is coming, right? He's arriving. And this really fits beautifully with the idea that Shabbos is coming and we're so happy, right? Kiva lishpot haaretz. Hashem is coming. He's coming to rule. He's coming and he's going to be recognized for the complete, fair, righteous judge that he is. Yishpot tevel b'tzedek, right? He is going to rule the world. Tevel, as we saw earlier, refers to the world or the inhabitants of the world. He's going to rule them with righteousness. V'amim be'emunato. And the nations of the world, or again, amim could refer to the Jewish people, be'emunato, with his faithfulness. And of course, this conjures up for us images of Modani lefanecha, right? Rabba emunatecha. And the beautiful Hasidish vort, that it's not that we have faith in God, it's that Rabba emunatecha bi, as Yishai Ribo says in his one of his songs. Is it him? No, it's Akiva Torgaman, sorry. That Rabba emunatecha bi, right? Hashem has tremendous amount of faith in us, that there's a lot of confidence. He put us in this world for another day because he knows we have what to accomplish and he knows that we can accomplish it. So what I'd like to do next time, we'll start with 97, but I just want to wrap up some of the connections between this parak of Tehillim and Sefer Shmuel, as well as Divrei Hayamim. I just want to show you how it appears in the many different places and why these psukim are so familiar. They're so familiar because we don't just say them on Friday night, but they're actually part of Psukei de Zimra. So we'll do that next time. But for now, we will wrap up. And I thank you all so much for being here to learn with me, to learn together. Always such a treat to see you all. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great day. Have a good week. Happy Monday.